Hello and welcome back. You're watching India Tonight with me, Shabani Gharat. Now, the tensions in Middle East remain high as Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched major military drills in the strategic Strait of Hormuz. Dubbed Smart Control of Hormuz Strait, the exercises starting on Monday and continuing featured live-fire missile strikes with parts of vital waterways temporarily closed for safety. Overseen by IRGC commanders, the drills aim to test readiness against potential threats amid U.S. military buildup in the region and warnings from Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei that American warships could be sunk. So, at one part, on one side of the story, of course, there is a conversation which is going on between Iranian authorities and officials and the U.S. in Geneva. But on the other hand, there are threats issued and, of course, military drills conducted. Also, the waterways around Iran were shut for the first time today.
Right, and so tensions are escalating, and this show of force coincides with the second round of indirect nuclear talks between Iran and United States in Geneva, and this is mediated by Oman. Discussions resume today, focusing on Iran's nuclear program, sanctions relief, and possible constraints through prospects for a breakthrough remains unclear, uncertain. Even just hours of the talks concluded with 20% of global oil flowing through Straits of Hormuz. The world watches closely for any escalation, and this will have impact on prices as well as geopolitical tensions. To discuss this matter in detail, we have two eminent guests, Naren Taneja, leading energy expert, as well as Vivek Mishra, Deputy Director, Strategic Studies Program at ORF. Welcome, gentlemen. First, I want to come to you, Mr. Taneja. As an impact of what is happening so far, you don't see the reaction which is there in crude. Do you think that that is warranted?
Well, you see, when you look at the crude oil prices today, the prices have already factored in, all that's going on in that area. As you know, the Americas, there with full force with 2 aircraft carrier and many, fighter aircrafts and all that. And also they've strengthened their forces around Iran on the northern side, in the Mediterranean and so on. So right now is basically posturing, whether, when Iran takes this step to kind of close Strait of Hormuz, that's part of the posturing to convey a message to the United States. Look, they're serious. If there is any kind of attempt by the U.S. to attack Iran, this is what they're going to do. They will basically mine or close the Strait of Hormuz. And America at the same time is making very clear that unless you really come to the table, you listen to us in terms of nuclear deal, but also in terms of overall situation within the country, I think we are going to act. So right now is basically posturing from both sides, and crude oil markets are very edgy. But otherwise, if you go by demand and supply fundamentals, oil today should not have been more than $58 per barrel because there is enough supply and there is no kind of, any significant demand rising. So that's not happening. So the Iran premium is all there. I mean, geopolitical premium is there. So my own sense is that, we have to wait and watch. But I don't really think that America is doing all this only for the nuclear thing. I think it's something more than that. Probably they are targeting regime change in Iran, and they probably are waiting that in response to what they are demonstrating in terms of military preparedness, that there would be kind of, a mass movement on the ground, or people may come out the street and they might really ask for the regime change. If that happens, there are enough people on the ground and they think the situation is right, they might go for some kind of military adventure or offense or whatever. But right now, I think is just the posturing. At the same time, we also have to see what Israel is wants, because Israel and America very often they work in tandem. They work very closely, and those who really understand Washington D.C. better than me, they claim that in fact the Jewish lobby and the Israeli lobby is very strong, and they want America to act militarily. So my own sense, talks are there, brokered by Oman and all that, but that might be on the surface. But beneath it, I think, somewhere America wants a regime change, and somewhere Israel is hoping that there would be a regime change.
absolutely. So this is posturing is what you are saying. Let's go over to you also, Mr. Mishra. If you can help us understand more on this posturing. You know, there is a live fire going on at the same time when the foreign minister is conducting talks in Geneva. And of course, the USS Gerald R. Ford and its presence in Iran. So is it like a contingency plan, like a plan B if the talks fail in Geneva? How are you looking at the whole situation in the region?
I mean, that's the whole plan, that you talk to Iran and have a pressure belt on. And that's been a consistent Trumpian strategy from the very start. You have, even during the first, the 12-day war that happened, both the aircraft carriers of the United States were positioned in the Gulf. And I think we are moving to that. We are circling back to that reality once again as Gerald Ford and Abraham Lincoln, the second aircraft carriers to be positioned is to reach the Persian Gulf by the next week. So I think it's going to be critical there. What is also important is, and it's referential that Israel was mentioned. I think the last week's trip that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made to Washington was critical. I think if you go back 3 weeks earlier, 3 or 4 weeks earlier, the United States came very close to another attack on Iran, but I think that was called off because of regional pressures from stakeholders like UAE and Saudi Arabia, who convinced the United States otherwise. So I think there's been these competing forces on the Trump administration, which is trying to play both sides, which is on pressure as well as on the possibility of a deal. Now, the main question really is, what is the Trumpian ask? The Trumpian ask here is that Iran brings its enrichment to zero. Remember that before the deal, they were enriching about 60%. Now, bringing that to zero may be a technical issue, but I think in the current context, it's more about sovereignty. It's more about national respect for Iran. And I think that severely conflicts and contradicts with the Trumpian ask. And given that Trump has had a frame in Venezuela where he choked off Venezuela's energy supplies, impacted Venezuela by sanctions, and then conducted a military operation. It has a frame, but comparing Venezuela to Iran are two different things. Iran has a huge sort of missile contingent with it, and I think one of the asks that Israel is making of Trump to convince Iran is about ballistic missiles and the ability of and the strategy to curtail ballistic missile program in Iran. So I think there are too many issues on the table. But I think Trump, if you listen to Trump administration, he's trying to play both by pressure and giving the option of an off-ramp to Iran. And I think that's the answer. Really, nobody knows except
right,
probably
Mr.
Trump.
Mishra, definitely. Only Trump knows what he is going to do next. But Mr. Taneja, I want to come back to you on the analysis what you're making, and many people are saying it is more of a posturing rather than actual steps being taken. But having said that, from India's point of view, looking at the situation, especially in last 2 days, there has been movements. I want to understand from you, if the situation escalates, how much of the impact will be there on India?
Well, the question is that, if that leads to some kind of a conflict, a military conflict, and Iran then decides to kind of respond in terms of, attacking oil and gas installations in the region, in Saudi Arabia, in Abu Dhabi or Iraq and Kuwait and other places, Bahrain, then of course, the results are, the direction is going to be very different. Then the whole situation will basically turn into a kind of regional conflict. And such a situation, of course, Strait of Hormuz would be targeted. I don't think that Iran would be militarily in a position to shut it down completely, but they would start mining it. And which means that, 20% of oil export from that region would be immediately affected. So as far as India is concerned, our worries are basically two. Number one is that any kind of, escalation there or kind of that situation going out of control oil prices will go up immediately. And our worry is not so much the supply of oil or our worry is always the price of oil. So if that happens, the prices go through the roof, then of course is a very bad news for us. And secondly, and that's even equally important, is
Taneja,
that
when
we
you
have
speak of
roughly
going
1
through the
crore
roof,
Indians.
sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Taneja. When you speak of going through the roof, are there chances of hitting rupees $100+ a barrel by first half of 2026?
Well, you see, if Strait of Hormuz is mined or sealed or kind of becomes a conflict zone or then oil prices will touch $100 per barrel in absolutely no time, because then the exports from major suppliers like Iraq and Saudi Arabia would be impacted, and in such a situation, the market sentiments will really go downhill, and then the prices will go up immediately. And the second, as I said, as far as we are concerned, the bigger question is that we have got 1 crore Indians living and working there. And they're working there, they're part of their economy, our economy and their economies are quite in a way integrated by now. So these are remittances, there are people working there. I mean, they're an important player in the national economies of all these countries. And of course, that would have a huge impact as far as overall, our economic relations with that region is concerned. So I think if it turns into a war, we are talking very bad news for the whole world, because oil prices will go up, and most importantly, bad news for American consumers, because they're used to cheap oil. And if oil goes to $100 per barrel, it's a bad news for President Trump, because he's going to face elections very soon, for Congress, and his voters want cheap oil. If he's not able to deliver on that agenda,
another quick question on the oil I wanted to understand how much buffer does India's strategic petroleum reserve do we have can actually provide if maybe this partial closure becomes permanent going forward, if there is an escalation in the region, in Iran?
Well, first of all, it won't become permanent. As I said, the supply at this stage is not a big challenge. Our challenge is always the price. And supply would become a challenge maybe if it escalates into a major war and the entire area is shut down. Then there will be a supply constraint, of course, as well for us. But at the same time, since we are the third largest consumer of oil, we are consuming like 5.7 billion barrels oil every day. So we need tons and tons of the ships coming to India. So our challenge is basically that. But as I said, I don't really think that Iran would go to that extent of really closing or trying to mine the entire Strait of Hormuz. They probably are militarily not capable of doing that. They'll be immediately targeted by Americans to stop them. And the second thing is that they know that then that would be an open invitation to America and Israel to go all full on war against the present regime in Iran. That's not what they want. So my own sense is we need to be anxious, but do we need to worry as of the situation on the ground today?
Definitely, Mr. Taneja, point taken. Due to paucity of time, once again, I want to come to you, Mr. Mishra, for the closing comments. In your assessment, do you think this is going to hit markets, or you think this is something which can be handled by both the sides, or now the three sides are there?
So I think the news has just come in, and I was going through it that the second rounds have ended in a rather positive note, and I think Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran, has just hinted that it was more positive than the first round of talks. And I think if that's true, then I think much of these cautionary tale can be left behind, and I think concrete steps can be taken from both sides. But given that, I mean, what is the exact ask of the Trump administration is not very much clear, and therefore what. But I think how much Iran can be concessionary is pretty much clear, and I think that gap has to be filled in terms of negotiations. And I think they've already promised a third negotiation soon, and the fact that within a week you have two rounds of talks is telling of the fact that there is a sense of urgency around the whole issue.
Yes.
But I think going forward, there seems, from at least from the news,
There is an understanding on the main principle that is reached is what the news is saying currently. Al Jazeera is reporting that, but we don't know what the main principles are as yet. I'm afraid, Mr. Mishra and Mr. Taneja, we are a little short on time today, but thank you so much for your inputs and thank you so much for joining us for this discussion on ET Now.
All right, now let's shift focus to US markets where S&P 500 is slipping in early Tuesday trading as